turn it over to Miss Kim Lehman.
All right. Thank you so much. Um, Thank you all for being here. And we're going to have a great day today, learning a little bit about bees, a little bit about beeswax, and things that you can do with beeswax. So, to begin, let me just tell you just a little bit about myself. I write for a beekeeping magazine called Bee Culture Magazine. I do a kids page, and we started a club called Bee Buddies. And we have kids in every state in the United States that are part of the Bee Buddies Club. And Sarah, I'll send you some information that you can pass on to others as well. And this is a book that I wrote called Beekeeper's Lab. It's 52 family friendly activities all about the hive. So, with that, let's talk a little bit about the hive, what's in the hive, and what goes on in with the bees. So let's see here. Let me start the slideshow if I can see here. There we go. Okay, so buzz about bees, a little workshop for you about bees. So in the hive there's one queen, a few drones, which are the males, and a whole lot of worker bees. Those are the females, and those are the bees that you see on flowers. So if you see a bee on a flower, like the flower right here, this flower looks like an onion, the top of an onion flower, and you can see the proboscis on the bee. Do you see that kind of reddish tongue? It's like a hollow tongue that the bees slurp up the nectar. It goes into their honey tank, and that's how they make the honey. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the hive, and we're going to spend most of our time talking about beeswax. And I'm going to show you how to make beeswax wraps and lip balm and other things that you can make with beeswax. So, this is the queen, and you can tell it's the queen because look at that long abdomen. So, you can see the head, you can see the thorax, kind of that black um, dot thing, and then the long, long abdomen where the segments are. The wings are attached to the thorax, and there's actually four wings. There are two large wings and then two smaller wings. And on the head, there's two antennas. There are two compound eyes, very big eyes, and three little eyes called ocelli. And then, of course, the proboscis. And on the thorax, where the wings are underneath, are six legs. And then we have the thorax. And we're going to talk about the thorax a little bit later. So the queen lays all the eggs, and you can see a bee egg. It's really small, but you can see the bee egg. And the queen will only lay one egg in each cell. If there is a bunch of eggs in there, it's usually the sign that you have a laying worker, and those eggs are not fertilized. The queen is the one that lays the fertilized eggs, and she can decide if she's going to lay a male, an unfertilized egg, or a female, a fertilized egg. So in the hive, you have the drones. This is a drone. The males, they have no stinger. These bees have no stinger, and they have a very large honey tank. If they have to move, these bees can carry a lot of honey, but their main job is to fertilize the queen so that she can lay eggs. Now the worker, oh, that's a queen photo. Whoops. The worker has a much shorter abdomen, but they can live up to 6 months in the winter and 6 weeks in the summer. And in a hive, you have about 60,000 bees in the summer. It's a lot of bees, and you need that many bees to collect all the pollen and nectar to keep the hive going. So this is the worker. This is a worker that was an egg, that was a larva, that grew into a pupa, that is now an adult bee. So this bee is chewing out of the wax comb. And you can see the three eyes on the top. Do you see the two eyes, the two big compound eyes? If you look on the top, you can see those three little eyes, those ocelli. And those eyes help to see light. They help the bees sense light. And bees are pretty amazing because they can fly about 3 miles in any direction, and they can find their way home. And there's been a lot of research done that bees can recognize um, landmarks, which is kind of interesting too. Now, the bee's eyes see differently than we do. They can see ultraviolet. So when you talk about the waves of light, you talk about Roy G. Biv, red, orange, red, orange, yellow, blue, Biv, blue, indigo, violet. And after that, higher on that spectrum is ultraviolet. So we can't see ultraviolet, but butterflies can and honeybees can. And it helps them to find the flowers because the flowers have to have the bees because that's how the flower makes seeds to have more flowers. So the flowers have evolved to have ways to attract the bees. Scent, they can attract the bees through scent. Color, they can attract the bees through color. And then they have these little like ultraviolet, they look like little lines that point to the center where the pollen is. We call them nectar guides. So mostly what we're going to talk about today is beeswax. So in the hive, you have a couple products. You have beeswax, which the bees make. You have honey, which the bees make. You have pollen, which the flowers make and the bees gather. You have honey, which the flowers produce the nectar. The bees collect the nectar. They add enzymes. They break down the sugars. They put it in the hive, and they make honey. And you also have royal jelly, which the worker bees make to feed the queen and to feed the larva for 3 days. And am I forgetting anything? Some people actually use the stings for medicine to help with autoimmune disorders like arthritis. It makes your body create its own cortisol. So those are some of the things that we're going to talk about in the hive. And propolis, which the bees gather from plants. It's really a sticky resin that the bees gather from plants. But let's talk about the wax. So the bees make the wax. The wax comes off of their body. So you can see these white sheets of wax coming off. You can see there's kind of clear wax coming out there too. So the wax comes off clear, and when it dries, it has a white color to it. It comes off of their body between those segments. And the bees have to have honey and nectar for their bodies to be able to make that wax. And we'll talk a little bit more about some interesting facts about beeswax. But let's go ahead and I'm going to stop my screen share so that we can make something. I'm going to show you how to make something very easy to make, and they're called beeswax wraps. So instead of using plastic, you can embed fabric with beeswax, and then you can use it to wrap cheese, to wrap an apple, to wrap a sandwich, to take on a picnic. So instead of using plastic, you can keep reusing these over and over again. So I have a few different sizes. This is a very large one. I have discovered I really like these large ones because it can wrap up. If you make bread, it can wrap up bread. So instead of putting the bread in plastic, you can wrap it up. And also with these big ones, you have a lot more space to wrap things up like a sandwich or something that you get to take on a picnic. You probably don't want to use meat. You probably don't want to wrap raw meat, especially in these. So you want to stick to vegetables, fruits, things like that. Here's one made with bee fabric. So the first thing you need is a piece of fabric. So you want a piece of cotton. You probably want 100% cotton. That's what I'm going to recommend. And then you want to wash it, the fabric. The piece that you have is already washed, I'm guessing. And then you want to cut up that fabric. Now, I am a huge person, I'm a huge fan to say use what you have first. So you can use an old sheet, you can use an old pillowcase. That's what this is right here. This is an old pillowcase. I wanted something that was a dark color so that you can see what I was doing on this piece of fabric. So you need a piece of fabric. You need some beeswax. Let's take a look at some of the different kinds of beeswax you can use. I have blocks of beeswax. I get the beeswax and I filter it, I clean it, um, and then I just use a knife and I shave it. Now, if you have a big hunk of beeswax like this, you want to put it in the freezer before you grate it because it gets soft and it gets kind of clumpy. So I just take a knife and I just carefully just slice off, shave it as thin as I can, and then I have those shavings that I can put onto the fabric. You can also buy these little pastilles, which I think is what you have. They are pure beeswax, and these are from Better Bee. The white is really, really small, and I think it works maybe a little bit better than the larger ones, which are yellow. So the yellow ones are just a little bit larger, but any of this beeswax will work. Now, you don't have to have resin. I did some experimenting, and you can just use the beeswax. These work just fine with beeswax. But if you want them to be a little stickier, like they stick to themselves a little bit more, you can use a pine resin. So this is some pine resin. It is from a tree, from a pine tree. And propolis that the bees gather from trees is similar to this resin. So bees gather propolis, they take it back to their hive and they waterproof their hive and they seal up their hive. It's antibacterial, antifungal. So they also use it as a way to sterilize their hive as well. So this is pine resin and it's clumpy. I will tell you that it's a little challenging to melt. And if you can crush it or grind it, you can crush it with a stone. You don't need anything fancy. I'm going to show you how I grind this resin up. And then you can have, you want some kind of an oil. This is jojoba oil. The reason jojoba oil is a good choice is it has some preservative qualities to it. If you use something like coconut oil or something like that, sometimes it gets kind of rancid. But this jojoba oil is more like a preservative and it's going to work better for you. But again, you don't have to have this. You can just make them just with beeswax. So you might want to do a little experimenting as well. So you have your fabric, you have your beeswax. If you want to, you can have pine resin. And if you also want to, you can have some jojoba oil. So you want to get all these ingredients embedded in your fabric. So there's two ways to do it. One is you can melt it. So you can put it in a pot with water. You want to make like a double boiler. So you don't want to put the beeswax directly onto a flame or onto your stove. So take an old pot, and believe me, you want an old pot because this stuff is sticky. So get an old pot. You can just go to the thrift store, put some water in there. Then you're going to put your can, or I like to use a can. It works just great. And then you want to melt all your ingredients in here. So you want to put your beeswax. You want to put powdered resin. It works a little bit better. So get your beeswax really hot. Then sprinkle and melt it. And then sprinkle your powdered resin in there. And put your oil in there. And then you can take an old paintbrush. And I mean like an old paintbrush. And you can paint it onto the fabric. Now it gets thick. So I'm going to talk about a way to even that out when I talk about the oven method. So you can do this, and then if you have leftover wax, so this is wax, this little square rectangle thing, it's wax and resin and oil. So it's all ready to go. I can take a knife and scrape this right onto the fabric, or I can put it in a little can like this and remelt it and paint it on. Okay, now we're going to talk about, I think, the easiest and my favorite way to do it. And that is, this is so much easier to do it this way. But I will tell you, it's harder to get it even. So it's a little bit more spotty. And that is just to put everything right on the fabric. So when I'm doing it this way, I like to start with the resin, and I want to grind up the resin because I want it to be powdery. I don't want it to be like rocks, because that is so not going to work. So I'm going to take my resin, and again, you don't need anything fancy. I mean, look at this, okay? So if you use any utensils for any of this stuff, I'm here to tell you that it's good to be like messy. And so this is just what I use for propolis and what I use for this resin. But again, use what you have. Just go outside with you can take a plate and, just a piece of, just a rock, a regular rock, and you can just grind it up yourself. I will tell you that this stuff is a little on the sticky side. So for your cleanup, I'm going to give you a little tip for your cleanup. And that is, you can put a little bit of oil onto your fingers and a little bit of oil, and then you can use soap and water, and that will help rinse it off. Or you can just use, plastic gloves, or, if you want to do it that way. I don't mind messy things, so I just use my hands. So I'm going to grind this up into a powder so you can see that it's, it's just kind of the rocks of the resin. And I'm just going to grind it up. This is actually a coffee grinder, if you didn't figure that out already. It's just a coffee grinder. And now it's just all in a powder form, much easier to use, much easier to use. So I'm going to take some of this powder, and I'm going to start sprinkling it on the fabric. Now, this is the first time I tried this. I was at an estate sale, and I found this sieve for 50 cents, and I thought, oh man, this is going to work great. And so I'm just going to kind of sift it and kind of evenly cover the fabric. Now, again, what the main purpose of this resin is to make the fabric sticky, like a little sticky, so that it'll stick to itself. That's the main purpose. You don't have to have it, but it does make it sticky. Some people really like the stickiness of it because they want to use it as much like saran wrap as they can. So this makes it a little bit more saran wrappy. So we have some resin. Next, I'm going to put a little bit of beeswax on here. So I'm going to take the beeswax and I'm going to evenly distribute it. I'm going to use the yellow beeswax because it'll be easier for you to see. So I'm going to distribute the beeswax on my fabric. You want to go the whole way to the edge. Don't worry about too much. If you put too much on it, I'm going to show you a tip on what to do if it's really waxy. Now, what happens if you have too much wax is when you bend it, it cracks. So you want to put some of these little pieces of beeswax on there. And then I'm going to put this in the oven at about 250 degrees, 225 degrees for about 5 minutes. And it's going to melt. It's all going to melt into the fabric. Then I'm going to pull it out, and if there's any places, you can pick it up. You can pick the fabric up like this. You can pick the fabric up, and you can hold it up to the light, and you can see the areas that you might have missed with the wax. You can just kind of hold it up and look, and then just keep adding wax where you have holes. Put it back in the oven until the whole thing is saturated. Now, if it's kind of thick, if it's kind of saturated thickly, this is your tip. Take a piece of fabric and that doesn't have any wax on it and put it under the piece that you just waxed. Put it in the oven and the wax will melt down onto the fabric beneath. So it works really super well to do it that way. So that is one way you can do it. Another way, oh, and by the way, what this is on is just an old cookie sheet. So I have an old cookie sheet that I covered with parchment paper. I forgot to tell you that part. You can use parchment paper or foil. Use an old cookie sheet because sometimes it does go through a little bit. So that's one way that you can do it. Another way you can do it is put another piece of parchment paper on the top and take an iron. And you can iron it that way. You can melt the wax that way, but it takes a little bit longer and it's a little bit messy. Some people love the iron. Me, not so much. I would much rather use the oven. So you might want to experiment a little bit. Try using the iron, try using the oven, and then you want to hold it up. And the way I kind of let it dry is you can hold it just for a minute or so, and it starts to get hard immediately. Or you can hang it up, or you can drape it over something. If you lay it down flat, sometimes if it's too waxy, that it'll stick to whatever you laid it on. So there you have it. Let it dry, and then you have your beeswax wrap. So this one, what I did is I did a little experiment and I wrote down what I put on each piece of fabric. So when it's sticky, you can wrap something like this and it stays. You see how that just kind of sticks to itself? That's what the resin does. But you can also just use beeswax. You can take a rubber band and put a rubber band around it like this. Say this is a cucumber and you cut the cucumber off and you want to put it back in the refrigerator. You can do this. Instead of using plastic wrap, you can use your beeswax wrap. Now, one thing that I'm going to share with you that I really like using glass jars like this. I really like glass jars to store soup, or you can put cut pieces of onions. I particularly don't use these beeswax to cover a bowl like you would like saran wrap because I just use a plate. I just put a plate on top of the bowl. But these wraps will also do the same thing. You can put them on top of a bowl. So those are the beeswax wraps. Now I'm going to show you something else that you can make with beeswax. I'm actually going to show you some other things with beeswax. Does anybody have any questions so far? You can type in your questions. Anybody have a question so far?
Miss Kim, we had one question about whether or not the wraps would be washable. What do you say about that?
You know what? I did an experiment.
Oh,
Because I had some homemade bread wrapped in this big one. And I wasn't paying attention to it, and it got a little moldy. So I just put it in the sink and I just scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed, and it's just fine. So you can wash them off. You can use mild soap. And after time, the wax will wear out a little bit. Don't throw them away. You can just re-wax them. So it's another way to reuse is once these start to wear out, you can just re-wax, which is great. Any other questions? I think we're good. Okay, so another thing that you can make with beeswax that's super simple is lip balm. So I'm going to show you quickly how to make a lip balm. I just turned on my hot water. But the first thing you need for your lip balm, and you have that recipe as well. So for your lip balm, you need beeswax, of course. You can measure it by volume. I measure it by weight, 14 grams. I'm going to use my, where is my measuring cup? Oh, here it is. It's right in front of me. Okay, so I like to use Pyrex like this. You can use a tin can. It works just fine. And you're going to put your wax in there. You're going to put about 3 tablespoons of olive oil. Olive oil works great. You can use other oils too. You can use almond oil, grapeseed oil. And you know what? It's not rocket science. So you don't have to, it doesn't have to be perfectly measured. If you like lip balm that's kind of soft, you're going to add more olive oil. If you want it a little harder, you're going to add more beeswax. And then I put a little lanolin in there as well. There's liquid lanolin and there's hard lanolin. So I'm just going to put just a little bit in there. I like to use a chopstick for my stir. So here's my stir, my little chopstick. So it's just lanolin. And then I'm going to put a little vitamin E in there just because it's a natural preservative. If you use jojoba oil, like if you got jojoba oil for your beeswax wraps, jojoba oil is great because, like I said, it is a preservative. It's a natural preservative. It has some natural preservative qualities. So I'm just cutting off the end of a capsule, a vitamin E capsule, and then I'm just going to squeeze it in the my melter, which is my Pyrex. And then I'm just going to melt that. That's it. That is it. And again, I'm using that same technique where I'm going to make a double boiler, where I'm going to have a pot with water and put it in that way. And I'm going to melt it. So while that is melting, let's talk about other things that you can do with beeswax. So you can make candles with beeswax, and you can roll beeswax candles. This is a sheet. It's just a rolled piece of beeswax. And then I decorated it. This is a candle that I make with, I'm going to tell you the technique. It's a wonderful secret. It's a bowl, and it's like a votive candle. So when you put a candle in the middle, it just glows. And the way I do it is are you ready for this? This is a great secret. I take a balloon. I take a balloon and I fill it with water. And then I tie it off and I dip it. I have a big pot with wax in and I dip it over and over again. And then when I'm done, I break the balloon. I put some flowers I put some flowers on the outside, and then I think my phone for some reason did not charge, and I'm not sure why. Okay, so I'll use this. So then what I do is I break the balloon, and then out comes the candle. Another thing that you can make, and these are all in my book. I put these are some of the things in my book. Is this is something that I came up with. I just took some embroidery thread and I dipped it in the wax like this. I dipped it in the wax and then I twisted it and I made little Christmas tree decorations by just twisting the wax thread. So you can come up with all kinds of ideas. You know, it's just your imagination. It's just using your imagination to come up with different things. This is a sculpture. A woman in Wisconsin. Her name is Liz, and she makes these beautiful wax sculptures. Isn't that amazing? I was a speaker for the state beekeeping convention in Wisconsin, and this was a gift that they shared with me. You can also create art. It's called Encaustic. When you take beeswax and you put a pigment with it, these are very, very simple monotypes. This is a workshop that I do a lot because if you're afraid of art, everyone can make something beautiful with this technique. You can embed beeswax and pigment in fabric, batik. This is something that I made with beeswax sheets. I just made some earrings just out of beeswax sheets. You can buy these sheets at a craft store, but I'm here to tell you they're much less expensive if you buy them at a beekeeping supply house like Better Bee. So you can buy these sheets of wax and you can make things out of it. This is another way to do encaustic. You use a little iron and you take the wax and the pigment and you just iron on it and kind of draw with the iron. So lots of things to do with beeswax. So type in the chat other things that you can think of that you can do with beeswax. Just type in the chat and let's see what else you can come up with of things that you can make with beeswax. And by the way, beeswax has a melting point of about 145 Fahrenheit. So it has a higher melting point than paraffin. So that's why it burns a little slower than paraffin. So they make great candles. A plate out of beeswax. That would be interesting. That'd be very interesting. Anything else you can think of that you can make out of beeswax? I'll give you a hint. You can make something that you can put on something that you wear. Oh, you can stamp beeswax. Excellent. You family, that's something that you can do for batik. If you're doing batik, you can stamp beeswax. So let's see, what else? What else can you do with beeswax? What about face lotion with beeswax? You can make leather conditioner. Stradivarius, who made violins a long time ago, he used beeswax and propolis to varnish his violins. And in Mongolia and Siberia, they would put propolis and beeswax on their sleds to keep them from cracking and rotting. So there's a lot of uses for beeswax, a lot of different uses for beeswax. All right, so Lynn wants to know what the two containers are filled with. Sarah, could you tell us what those two containers are filled with?
Sorry. So if you did get a kit from the library, you have the beeswax in one container and you have the resin in the other container. The oil was going to be too difficult to share, but I figured it would be something that would be easy for people to get a hold of on their own. But you should have enough resin and beeswax to do a one sheet of wrap. Probably more than one sheet, really. But yeah, play around with it and see. There should be an adequate amount for a few sheets, probably.
Beautiful. Another thing that when we're talking about these beeswax sheets, you can do the same technique and make a lunch bag. So just take a fabric bag. You can make a fabric bag out of the cotton that you have and do the same thing. Embed that cotton with the beeswax with those techniques that we did today. And you can make your own waterproof lunch bag. So that's another thing that you can do with beeswax. All right. Woo! It's all melted. Yay! It's all melted. So I'm going to take a piece of foil and I'm going to put the piece of foil on the, since I lost my camera, I'm going to try to hold these up for you. So you can buy these in your handout. It has where to buy these lip balm tubes. Now, this gets really super messy. I am just going to tell you that now. So you want to put foil down on the table first, because I guarantee you're going to spill this when you're pouring it. So you just put your beeswax, your lip balm tube. Okay, I'm going to take my melted, so this is lanolin, beeswax. What else did I put in here? Some vitamin E and oil. And you're just going to pour it. So if you use a tin can, there you go. I've gotten pretty good where I can pour a lot of them without spilling, but it takes a little bit of time. So that's it. That is it. And then you have your lip balm. It is that simple. I'm here to tell you that there's really no need to buy it. It's so simple to make. A few tips. Let your beeswax cool down a little bit, because what happens is when it starts to cool, it sinks down in there and you have to put a little bit more in. So let it cool just a little bit, pour it into your tubes, let it completely cool before you put the lid on, and ta-da, you have your own lip balm. You can make labels yourself, or you can take Sharpies and just draw designs. You can give them as gifts. Everybody in your family, your neighborhood, you can also sell these if you want to have a little business going. You can make your own lip balm and sell it that way too. All right, that was super easy. Okay, so it is almost time for us to go, but I want to just show you one more thing. Okay, this does not have to do with beeswax, but it's super simple because it has to do with honey. So another product of the hive is honey. And all you need to do to make a really simple summer treat is take some honey and put the same amount of nut butter together. So because this is so simple, I'm just going to go ahead and do some. So again, it is not science. It is not rocket science. Put a little bit of honey, put about the same amount of nut butter. You're going to mix it up. And then start adding some stuff to it. If you want it to be a complementary protein, add a little powdered milk. Then it becomes a complementary protein, the protein in the milk and the protein in the nut butter. So I'm going to put a little powdered milk in there. You can put other kinds of things in there. You can put flaxseed, you can put raisins, you can put other kinds of dried fruit. You can put a little oatmeal in there. I like a little oatmeal in mine. And look at that. You just mix it up. You can use your hands to mix it up. And then you can make these little balls. You don't have to, there's no need to cook. I probably need to add a little bit more peanut butter and a little bit more honey. You make little balls that stick together like this, and it is a super delicious treat. So it's something very easy to make. And again, that recipe is in your handout, as well as how to make kind of like a Gatorade, how to make your own hydrator for the summer, and some other kind of beauty tips, because honey is great for your skin. Cleopatra used to take a honey and milk bath, and Queen Anne or Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria used to put honey in her hair and rinse it out to make her hair very luxurious. So those are some other things that you can do with honey. So we didn't even talk about one of the most important things that bees give us. We get beeswax, honey, propolis, but also pollination. I always want to talk about pollination when I talk about bees, because if you like to eat fruits and vegetables, especially, you can thank the bees for helping those plants make food and seeds, especially if you like to eat things like almonds, apples, plums, watermelon, cantaloupe, cucumbers, any kind of berries, blackberries, blueberries, raspberries, cranberries, plums, all of those things we can thank the bee for. So we have a little bit of time. Does anybody have a question that you would like to ask? We're just looking around to see if I had anything else to show you. Does anybody have a question that you would